University.
Just before I leave the Hong Kong element of my growing up, there was obviously parts there that left an indelible mark on my mind. For example, the typhoons that we had in Hong Kong. You know, Typhoon Rose, Typhoon Wanda, fantastic rainstorms, fantastic.
Do we have them
loss
so
of,
much anymore, as bad as they were?
we haven't had the force as bad, and now we have buildings that can sustain higher winds. You've got to remember, going back to the late 50s, 60s and even the early 70s, there was a lot of people living on boats and typhoon shelters. There was a lot of people living in shanty towns in the hillside.
In the hills.
These were just made of cardboard and corrugated iron. A lot of them, there was no electricity, there was no running water, there was standpipes, and a lot of them cooked with gas and even had gas lighting. And in the dry season, they would fall over and a fire would start. And
this is up to when? The mid-70s?
This is right up through the 60s and into the 70s. And the government, of course, then realised, and with the influx of from communist China of all the refugees, we basically tripled our population in a very short period of time. But the government of Hong Kong did a fantastic job of taking it upon themselves to get involved in rehousing. And the first of the public housing estates.
Yeah, and the new town development.
New town development. And that really grew into an explosion of the new towns, which if we didn't have today, we wouldn't be able to sustain populations of 7.8 million people. So among my memories of very good times and a lot of the fun things that were in my childhood and my teenage and formative years wasn't just the sport and the fun and going out, but also the black days, which fortunately were few and far between, but when they came and the devastation came, they were sad times.
And were it mostly the natural disasters you're talking about, the typhoons?
Yes.
It wasn't a personal black day or anything?
No.
It was just general. And then, so were there deaths and
yes, lots of
homelessness and all that?
Yes, lots of that, and we're always rehousing people and putting people up in temporary shelters and making sure that the Red Cross and all the aid agencies got involved. I got involved with. I mentioned earlier that I was involved with the European YMCA, and there was a gentleman there by the name of Jim Atkinson, and Jim Atkinson was the operations director of the World Council of Churches, and Jim's role in life was actually to set up a number of schools for refugees and young men who couldn't go to university, but he could provide an environment where they could learn about automotive engineering, and he would acquire an old car, and that would go into one of his schools, and they'd strip the car down, they'd rebuild it, and they'd fix the engine, and all these young men, as a result of him, ended up getting a trade.
Right.
And it was sponsored by the church, it was sponsored by and driven very much by him.
In Hong Kong?
In Hong Kong. Because he got involved in that, he also got involved with a lot of the youth groups that were in the YMCA and the church. And we got involved in go-karting, and I learned to drive with him when I was 12 years old at the tank training ground, which is up near where Pickwick Prison is, in an old Land Rover and an old Hillman car, which we used to call Wandering Willie, because the steering was a bit wonky, and you could turn the steering, nothing would happen for a couple of seconds, and then it would go.
And a lot of young guys would get a chance to do that?
Yeah, there was a whole group of between 20 and 30 of us that did that. Yeah. And we'd go canoe camping out here, we built our own canoe. So there was a lot of things going on.
Lots going on, yeah, absolutely. Is that still going on?
I believe it is.
But do people not pay as much attention to it as
well,
they used to,
it goes on in different ways. There's a lot going on, say, in the Outward Bound.
My kids have been through school. They do their courses. It's very good.
Yeah, all the schools, that have their extracurricular activities. There's some fantastic things that the schools are providing. Your kids at KG5?
No, they're at Renaissance.
Renaissance, but they've got lots of extracurricular.
Oh God, yes. I mean, tons of stuff going on that we never had when we were at school.
But I just digress for a little bit, just to remind myself of there was other things other than the good times, but there was also some bad weather, and Hong Kong has gone through tough times, and it's had to survive the tough times. That include water shortages, 4 hours of water every fourth day, where people would line up. In fact, my first leave, we'd had a water shortage, and we were rationing the water at home, so we were filling up the bathtubs and then using the water as best we could and standing there and dousing ourselves with it. And then when we got back to the UK, and I went to my auntie's house and went and had a bath and came out and said, "What will I do with the water?"
Let it out, son. But do you not want it for watering the plant?
That's right. You always wanted to use it for something else. But so these are a lot of part of my memories, and I had girlfriends, and we were, and some of the things that we did were, which were, how's best to describe them, but best just tell them the way they are. During the 60s, the Americans were coming here in rest and recreation from Vietnam. There was a lot of flyboys, there was naval guys, there were Marines, and by the time I was 15, 16, 17, 18, me and my friends were, we would go down to the Sailors and Soldiers Home and Channel Fleet Club. We'd go down there playing snooker during the summer months, and we'd be meeting a lot of these guys. We'd take them home at Christmas. They were away from home, and we'd also take money off them playing snooker.
Yes. Well, they were flush, and there's no point taking it where they were going.
They were flush, and after they'd had 2 San Miguels when you hadn't had any booze for a long time,
the rain was off, and
So there I was, application in to go to university in Perth, provisional acceptance, and university didn't start until February the following year, and I had just finished my A-levels in the May. So went by sea via Taiwan, Japan, Guam, Philippines, down the coast of Australia, and all the way down to Melbourne, where my mother had 2 sisters that had emigrated many years before. Right. And it was a branch of the family I'd never met. And there was 2 boys in one family, 2 girls in the other, and went to my Aunt Ella, who was Mum's older sister, and she'd been out in Australia since the late 40s, early 50s. And so I got there, and she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I've just got off the ship, and what I plan to do is, you'd call it today a gap year or a gap 6 months. I'm going to try and find a job, and we'll see what goes. And I'm waiting for my results, which will probably come through late September-ish, and from then I'll then know how to process my application." And then Perth would be my intended.
So it was amazing. It wasn't the September that year; it was the following year.
No, it was September that year. But I was arriving in Melbourne within about 3 weeks of leaving Hong Kong. So I got to Hong Kong in about the mid-June time frame, and university was February the following year, because they have a calendar.
Of course,
they've got a calendar year.
Right.
So Ella, God bless her, she said, "Look, there's an outhouse granny flat. It's kind of a lean-to built onto the end of their house with a little bedroom in there, with a single bed and a cupboard." She said, "You're welcome to have that." And she said, she said, "You can't stay there forever, and if you stay there for a couple of weeks and then you get a job, I'll charge you for a bit of room and board, and I'll make sure there's breakfast on the table and a meal when you come home at night, and then the rest is up to you." Right. So that was Ella, and her daughter, Eleanor, she worked in car insurance for the insurance company that was attached to the RACV, Royal Automobile Club of Victoria. It was called the RACV Insurance Division. And she said, "Look, we're always looking for people, mainly young people that come and go." She said, "But we're always looking for people to be working on the counters, doing renewals and taking inquiries and what have you. And it's a simple enough job. And they'll give you training, and and if you'd like to give it a go." Mm-hmm. So 3 days later, I turn up at this Club Motor insurance place in the city and get the job. So suddenly I've got a job, got a place to stay, and and I'm here, and I'm 19, coming up, and
what could possibly go wrong?
And then my other cousin, she introduces me to her boyfriend, who played for one of the local football teams, Albion Rovers. So I got a trial for them, started to play soccer, because I'm a reasonable sort of, can kick a ball around. And of course it's the tail end of winter. Well, it's in winter when I'm getting there, so that's the football season.
Yeah, just to start.
So there I was. I got a job playing football, and I'm using public transport. I've got a place at my aunt's place, and then I meet a woman. Actually, I met a woman, but it came about. I was using the train to get home, each night, and I got on the train this day, and there was a chap strap hanging beside me, and he said, hello. He said, I've seen you in the company. He said, you've just joined. He said, I'm Robert Patience. I said, I'm Robert as well, I'm Bob. And he said, yeah. He said, well, welcome to the company. He said, if there's any, he said, I've been to Hong Kong. I know you come from Hong Kong. Your cousin told me. So we struck up a conversation, and he introduced me to a whole new circle of friends. And one of his friends was a trainee pilot, and he was getting his hours in. And he said to me, I was been there about a week, and he said, do you fancy going to a fly-in barbecue? And I said, what does that entail? And he said, well, the guy that's doing his training needs to get his hours in, needs to do some cross-country work, so he's going with an experienced pilot, but he's going on a 6-seater aeroplane, so there's 4 extra seats, and he's actually going up to Shepparton, which is on the New South Wales border, for a fly-in barbecue, and he's going to do a bit of cross-country. So we're going to fly up there in the morning, stay in the afternoon, there's a bit of an air display, and then there's a barbecue, and then we'll fly back the following day. And all you need to do, you have to pay for your own beer and a contribution for the food, but you put in $40 as your contribution for the fuel. We're all doing that. So I said, I'll be in that. Got to Shepparton, went to the fly-in barbecue, met a young lady who was a trainee teacher, and she became my first wife.
Oh. Right. Well, that was quite to come up to just 2 weeks when you were just turning up for a...
She didn't become my wife that quickly.
No, but I mean, you got there, you got your job, you got somewhere to stay.
Much. No. Much. There's a lot more that goes on from there. So I get my first paycheck, and up until then, I'd been living off traveller's checks, and my dad had given me a bunch of traveller's checks.
Remember them?
to keep me going.
Yeah. So
I had enough cash in hand, to keep me going. Now I've got a job, and I've got my first paycheck. So there's a bank near the train station. So at lunchtime, I went down there, and to open an account at the Bank of New South Wales, now called Westpac. And I went in and stood in line, waiting to get a form to fill out to open a new account. And there's a little door there, and it says branch manager, Lance Hurd, migrant advisory officer, etc., etc., etc. And he comes out, and he sees me, and he says, haven't seen you here before, mate. He said, can I help you? I said, I'm here to open up a new account. Come with me. It's much. He said, you'll be waiting there all day. He said, they'll be putting money in, taking money out. So he got to chatting with me. So I sat in his office. He brings the form out. He's filling the form out for me, right? And he says to me, and he asked me what I was going to do. And I was going to Perth study architecture, where all this stuff. And he said to me, he said, have you ever thought of computers? And I said, not really. He said, well, listen to me. He said, I've got a friend of mine who's the personnel manager of BP Australia. And they're always looking for young, bright people at university level, or about to go to university, or maybe have started but not sure which direction to go. And they get taken in for their executive training program, which includes part-time day release to do business studies, etc. He said, but at the moment, they've just installed the first commercial computer of its kind in Australia, and they're looking for people that have got the right aptitude. Would you be willing to go down and take an aptitude test and meet him? And I said,
well, this is from, you just walked into a bank.
I walked into the bank to open an account. And I remember the guy's name to this day, Lance Hurd. So he said, phone me in the next couple of days and I'll set it up. And lo and behold, I phoned him the following day, and he made an appointment for me to go down to BP, down St Kilda Road, opposite the Cenotaph, went in there, was met by a sort of a personnel officer who gave it wasn't even much of an interview. It was more a case of your credentials, tell me who you are, what your school level, etc., and writing all this stuff down. And then said, right, we're going to put you through an aptitude test as the first step, because that's going to determine. They explained what it was all about. I went into a little room, they gave me this aptitude test, multiple choice questions and a whole bunch of other things. It took me about an hour to go through, and the young lass took the form. She said, thank you very much, and she said, we'll be in touch. And that was it. So 3 days later, I come home on the train, and my Aunt Ella's all excited. She says, Robert, a telegram boy came today on a motorbike. And for a telegram for you.
That's
for
quite
you.
Exciting.
Telegram for you. I said, what does it say? I wouldn't open your... the usual stuff.
I wouldn't open your
And I opened this up, and it basically said, aptitude test successful, job opportunity possible, please come for an interview, phone this number. And I found the number, and 4 days later went for an interview, and they laid it all out for me that they would offer me a job in BP. And it was part of it that I would enter the computer section. I would be a trainee computer operator, trainee officer, and I would be eligible for a part-time day release after a probationary period of 6 months. The part-time day release, depending on, and it was one of these generic forms, it would depending on background, ability, potential, etc., the company reserves the right to put you into different courses, because they get people doing petrochemicals, people who want to put in the accountancy department, marketeers. And in my case, dumped me in the computer room.
They've taken people at 19.
Yes.
And given them a career.
Groomed them.
Yes. At that point.
Groomed them.
And you just walked into bank.
And
do you ever feel that serendipity had a little bit?
Yes. There's more than one. It's happened more than once in my life. And so there I was, and the job offer was 3 times what I was earning on the counter at Club Motor Insurance.
And you're 19 at this point.
I was 19. So I said so I've got all this, and they said, how soon can you be available? And I said, well, I'll ask the question another way. How soon do you need me to start? And they said, well, we will actually want you to start within 2 weeks if you can. And so I'm thinking, okay, I said, well, look, I've taken on a job. I said, they obviously need to either get a replacement for me, or if that's, I'll ask them if it's okay. But, this seems to me to be a very sensible approach. And so I went to the personnel manager in the Club Motor and said to him, look, and I just told them what happened.
Yeah.
No hiding it, no saying I'm your father's died and I've got to get back, none of that crap. And they said, well, that's okay, can you carry on for another, this week and all of next, and then finish? And I said, yeah, I can do that. And so I finished one job on a Friday, started the next one on the Monday, straight in the computer room, trainee computer operator, winding tapes, stacking.
You'd never been near a computer before?
Never. Never seen one. I've seen one on films.
Yeah, but what year was this? 1960.
This was 1968. 67, 68. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So computers were, it wasn't
67.
It was in nobody's radar at that point.
It was 67. Because I was 19, and I wasn't 20 yet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I got my chronology right.
Doesn't matter.
It's neither here.
You were young.
I was young. Yeah. But so joined BP, very successful, really enjoyed it. Good salary, did shift work, afternoon shift, did night shift.
All computers.
All working in the computer room.
Right.
And so you start off doing manual things, loading and unloading magnetic tapes, putting paper in to do things like statements and invoices. A lot of the information that was coming in was coming through on paper tape. It had to be wound up, put through a reader. You could actually physically watch data being datified, if you like, processed. Because as information came in on holes on paper tape or cards, it would be going click, click, click on the magnetic tape. You then sort it into an order that could then match against a master file that had maybe names and addresses, account numbers, and then you'd marry them together with the amounts, and that would become a statement. And you could actually watch the process. It was discs hadn't even
it was a very basic and start of computer.
Very much so.
It would give you an idea.
And during the time that I was there, computers went on leaps and bounds. The first computer I worked on had 16K of memory.
Yeah, what's 16K? I don't think, man. It's nothing.
Your watch has got 1,000 times more
right.
than the first computer. So I worked for them, and in the process, I started to get quite serious with my school teaching lady friend.
Right.
And she, when it came to school holidays, she came down to spend the holidays with her mum and dad, who lived on the outskirts of Melbourne in a small township called Berwick. And we carried on our relationship. She would come down to Melbourne, and I would go up there, and we'd sometimes meet halfway, and we'd do things as you do. Yeah, we'd go out and about and enjoy life, and I would actually go and stay at their house. got to know her father very well. He enjoyed taking me to the pub and having a game of pool.
Yeah, bit of chat.
Yeah. And so I did that for a while. My wife by this stage had become a qualified teacher. She wasn't my wife at that time, and she applied at that stage the Victorian Education Department. I'm guessing this is still going because even though schools blank. But
yeah, don't worry.
I
better not touch it because
I won't touch it.
But yeah, but it's just a left thing. That's fine.
They had some very funny, antiquated rules. Her father had been a school teacher. He'd been also a ciphers expert during the Second World War, and her sister was a school teacher, and she didn't want to be a school teacher. She wanted to do agricultural science, but the systems were so backward and so biased that part of the agricultural science course was to spend 6 months on a farm, and it was men only, residential and men only. So she became a teacher, and then one of the other ones kicked in. She wanted to, because she had come from country Victoria and then had qualified as a teacher, Victorian Education Department said, right, we need teachers in the country, so if you come from the country, we're going to place you in the country, and the only way that you'll ever be moved to the city is if you're married. Even if you're engaged, it wouldn't count. So we thought about it long and hard, and we got married when we were 21. We had to get married because I needed her to come with me to the city.
Right.
So
yes, if she was going to have a job, she could have come without a job.
Yes.
But, you know, why make things difficult? You know?
So we got married, and by this time I had moved to a small apartment in St Kilda, which was fairly close to where it was a tram ride or a train ride away from where I worked.
St Kilda, they have Australian rules. They have Australian rules.
They do. And in fact, we used to train with the Australian rules boys because the football club that I played with, their training ground was fairly close, and the St Kilda Aussie rules boys would come over and ask us to teach them how to kick a football.
All right.
Yeah, so and they were big, strong, strapping boys.
It's a hardy game, that Australian rules.
Absolutely, and I enjoyed that cross fertilisation, and we used to go and have a few drinks with them afterwards in the pub nearby. So that was good. So my first wife, Kathy, a lovely lady, we were married for 23 years, had 2 kids. We stayed in Melbourne. A couple of years later, what I ended up getting out of that was I got the first part of my business degree, which was a diploma in management studies. So I learned all about law of contract and legalese. I learned about accountancy, the basics. Marketing, sales and marketing, a whole bunch of personnel management, a whole bunch of things that were embedded within the first couple of years of the.
And were you sent outside of BP
yes,
to do that study?
Yes, there was a college which was now part of Monash University, but at the time was Caulfield Tech, and Caulfield Tech had a business department, and we went there.
And that was chosen and approved and paid for by
BP.
So they obviously would be good because they'd make sure it was good.
That's right. They benefit from it. A couple of years downstream, I came to the realization that I had stayed in computer operations, but I'd been taught the fundamentals of computer programming, system analysis, but I hadn't had the opportunity to move into those departments because there was no job vacancy at that time. And I don't know whether there was they were artificially, that if they got you in a pigeonhole, they kept you there.
If you're doing a good job, you tend to get kept where you're doing a good job.
But along the way, there was another company that had set up their own computer operations, was Olympic Tire and Rubber Company, and that eventually became part of Dunlop. But Olympic Tire and Rubber Company were owned by a family called the Beaurepaire Group, and Ian Beaurepaire became Sir Ian Beaurepaire, had represented Australia in the 1956 Olympics as a swimmer. And his family had, as a result, had set up Olympic Tire and Rubber Company and Olympic General Products and Olympic Cables and Beaurepaire retreads, and his company became very large. And they put their own computer system in, and an advertisement appeared in the paper looking for experienced computer operations staff with very good career prospects. And I joined them as a shift leader and became I became acting operations manager within about 9 months.
For all the computers?
Yeah, and I was 25.
25 at that time, yeah. So you were doing very well at a young age.
I was doing well,
yeah.
I was actually 24. So, yeah, 24, 25. And And again, it was a virtual upgrade in salary by about 40%. It meant, and of course by then I had.
Well, you'd obviously had other pay grades up.
Yeah, I had. But by then, of course, I had my first car. We were renting a nice little apartment down St Kilda, which is a lovely migrant area. Lots of nice Italian and Greek and restaurants and bistros and Chinese restaurants.
I was in Melbourne 30 recently, but 30 years ago, the first time I was there, and it was Greek, Italian. That's where they all went. And the food was Mediterranean, beautiful, veggies, tomatoes, all that.
When I went down to, I stayed in a road called Gurner Street. If you ever remember St Kilda, there was a railway that came into the head end at St Kilda.
I didn't stay there for like 3 weeks or something. Yes.
Well, there was a place called the George Hotel where all the ladies of the working ladies would go.
Enterprising ladies of the evening.
Yeah, that's one. And a couple of streets back from that was where I had this apartment, and it was really good because I could go from, I could walk to all the restaurants. And I walked down to Ackland Street one day, and there was a Chinese restaurant there called the Fairy Stork. And I thought, I've got
Fairy Stork.
You've got to have a meal. Got to have a meal at the Fairy Stork. You can't pass by the Fairy Stork.
Right.
And I walked into the Fairy Stork, and William Leung was sitting at the cash register, and he was a guy that I played football when I played football as a schoolboy for Hong Kong, as one of the few expatriates. He was on the team, so I knew him, and his family had set up the restaurant. So it became a place where I went on a regular basis. And he would always give me a discount.
Right.
and
that's what he was doing. He was working in the restaurant.
He was running. Well, his parents ran the restaurant, and he was working there and working very hard. And eventually, but eventually, he'd probably take it over. Yeah. We lost track after a couple of years, but during that couple of years,
it'd be quite tight.
Good mate. Yeah, good mate. We'd go down the pub every now and again. So that was just an aside. So we stayed in St Kilda for a while. Took a slightly more upmarket little townhouse in Clayton, slightly more out of town. But I had both a motorbike and a car, and I used the motorbike to get to work. It was much easier through the traffic,
right?
Other than when the weather was bad.
Motorbikes,
when I was with Olympic Tire and Rubber Company. I moved up through the ladder. I did everything while I was there. I was a shift leader. I was the operations supervisor. I was the acting operations manager. While they had someone that they'd already was trying to get into that job, who'd worked in another part of the company and had a lot more experience and a lot more, he had more age and everything else than I had. He had 20 years in the company, right. So they were trying to put him in there. But he was finishing, and so I acted in that role for a while, which was great because I did a lot of things from a management point of view. So I was running the computer operations. I was doing all the things with the computer programmers. We were going to different parts of the company and looking at new systems to develop for different roles, for different sections and their need.
All for computerization.
All for computerization. And we put in the first disk system there, brand new operating systems there. It was an ICL computer, which I'd become very familiar with. We put in George 2, George 3. These are all sophisticated operating systems for their day.
And this is for running the lines, the manufacturing lines?
No, none of them. This is all the commercial stuff. This is everything from invoices, statements, personnel, pay.
Right, so HR,
stock control,
right,
yes, all of those applications. And my wife got a job in the city, and at Fitzroy State School. She asked me one day, she said, all of the kids in my school are all migrants, and we've only got 2 school teachers in our school who are male, and both of them play Australian rules football, none of them play soccer. Will you come up to the school maybe once a fortnight and do a bit of training with the kids? So I said yes. And she had a very large class of kids, and she was a bit worried that she told them all that I was going to come up and we're going to go to a little a little field close by which we'd lay out.
And where were they from, these kids? Greek?
Italy,
so
Greece, French, Yugoslavs.
Raised on football, like the Scots.
Raised on football because the parents were raised in football.
Yes,
the parents
but they weren't getting the opportunity.
They were not getting an opportunity. So the first day, so Kathy was very worried that maybe only 10 kids would turn up for her class. So she asked the next door class as well. I had 48 kids and one plastic ball. Because I didn't know what to expect. I had a plastic ball in the front.
Yeah.
And I thought, what the fuck do you do with bloody 48 kids? But what? So you improvise, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, this is the first day, so that's
So I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. Today is not going to work for everybody. I said, but what I'm going to do today is I'm going to start you doing a bit of circuit training. This is what you do when you get involved in being a professional football player or a serious football player, because we do exercises and we do different things. So I split them into groups, and I had them, do push-ups and what have you, and do things together. And then I would have one group where there was somebody who'd be in goal, and they would take turns kicking the single football. By the time I came the second time, I had six. I had more bloody footballs than you could shake a fist at. And I did that for a while and really enjoyed it. I had one guy.
And what did you do it every fortnight, on the weekends or on the evenings, or what?
Fortnight evenings, and I made it coincide with my work, so that I got time off, so I could finish and be at the school by 4 o'clock.
All right, so you did right after school.
Yeah, right after school, and me leaving a bit early.
Yeah, but I'm sure that your company would.
My company had no problems with that at all. I told them what I was doing. One guy, he was a big, fat, boofy guy, and he was almost the same size as me, and I think he was 12. And he came up to me, and he had these big, thick glasses, and he looked at me really closely. He says, "Hey, Mr. McCuddy, are you Italian?" Lots of little stories like that. Really, I always remember Vito.
And he was Italian, obviously.
He was Italian, yeah. A real little fat bugger. He couldn't run, he couldn't kick a football, but he knew all the teams, he knew all the players.
He was a fan.
Yeah, he was a fan. He was definitely a fan. So, we did that and spent a couple of years, and then the time that we got together, we travelled all over Australia, all over Victoria in particular.
Did you do weekends away at that time?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Lots of them. Well, unless it was the football season, we're not very often playing. And you got money in your boot, depending on, it was semi-professional.
Oh, all right, okay.
There was money there to look after your travel expenses, and they put, it was.
It's junior football in Scotland.
It is. We were playing against the lowest. If the crowds got to 600, that was a big crowd.
At least you were playing in front of someone. I mean, I played sport all my life. I don't think anyone, one man and a dog, ever stopped to watch me. So
absolutely. Yeah. So that was bloody good fun, and there was lots of things going on. And my wife Kathy, very, very bright lady, and she said, I've always wanted to go to Asia. So I want to go to Hong Kong. I want to go to China. I want to go to Japan. And of course, my parents were still living here then. So we talked about it long and hard, and the following year we did the numbers, and we said, why don't we go on a working holiday, and we'll start off in Hong Kong, but we'll plan a trip all the way to London. And I said, you're a school teacher, I'm in computer operations, and there'll be jobs
along the way.
There'll be opportunities. And we'll go where Mum and Dad are first. And she hadn't met my parents at this stage. My parents hadn't come to Australia for the wedding. They hadn't come for the wedding. They couldn't come for the wedding. And so they were going to meet her for the first time. We'd been married by this stage 3 years. Right. Yeah. So got on a plane. A mate of mine, Chris Ross, that I met through the guy with the aviation group. He's still my best friend to this day. He's going through a bit of a problem at the moment with a medical thing. So I'm going
it's happening. It's all happening.
I'm going to Australia in a couple of weeks' time, and I'm going to go and see him. And we play golf together. We've drunk wine together. We've done lots of things together. Anyway, Chris he works in aviation sales, and he was with Ansett, based in Darwin. And while he was there, some American guy came off a ship with a big American car and did a U-turn in front of him on a motorbike and smashed into him. He broke his leg, and his ankle was about 15, and he was in a hospital in Darwin. So we booked a flight, Melbourne, Darwin, Hong Kong, London. I mean, from Hong Kong to London, it was stopping at another two places, but that's by the way. Got to Darwin, saw Chris, took him out at hospital, took him to the boozer, usual thing, have a couple of beers, put him back in. Came to Hong Kong, arrived in Hong Kong, got off the plane, and went home to Mum and Dad, and it was big reunions, and everything was jolly, and my dad said to me, he said, you've got to come and meet someone, like now. So, Kathy, you stay with Nancy, and get to know. Like now, right now.
Immediately. Yeah.
So, okay. So he and I go up to the club that's in the residential area behind the dockyard. Big oasis, lovely place with grass, tennis courts, private beach, all that, and a big sort of hill in between, so you didn't get them. So I go up there to meet this guy called Ken Dixon, and Ken Dixon was the computer manager for the Hong Kong and Whampoa Dockyard Company. And Ken had brought in an ICL computer. ICL were pushing him to upgrade it and bring in a new operating system. He knew nothing about it. He had spoken to my dad to find out I had experience because I'd been asked the question. And he said to me, I'm being forced by the company to take 2 months leave because I haven't had leave for 2 years and they're doing this upgrade and I'm running this computer not only for the company but on a bureau basis for Hong Kong China Gas and San Miguel Brewery and another 2 small companies. And he said, would you be willing to do my job for 2 months? I just got off the plane. He'd obviously asked me lots of questions, and I sort of given. So I said 2 things. I said,
well, they obviously knew beforehand. Your dad must have.
Yeah, he told lots of things. I said, provisionally, yes. I said, but you know, if my wife is dead set against it, that we just want to stay for a couple of, you know, I said, but I'm going to bring her into the loop. Unlikely that she'll say no, but I'll bring her into the loop. Secondly, what does it entail? How much does it pay? Dad, can I stay? You know, stay here. Yep. So that was fine. When do you need me? He said tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm going to look. I know nothing about it. It's all up to you. Basically, that sounds like it's what really is happening.
Yeah. So the following day, I walked down to the office, and Kathy had no problems with that at all. She said, "Yeah, just go for it. We've come for a working holiday. You'll not get a better deal than this." And at the time, I think you wanted.
And did they pay you more than the going rate? They must have to pay.
$4,500 a month. He was going to pay me for the 2 months I did his job, and Dad would provide accommodation. That wasn't a problem with the company because it's company provided. So I went down. I almost virtually stayed with him the whole day and started work the next day. I upgraded the computer system for him. I went to San Miguel Brewery and met the guys there. I upgraded one of their systems for them. China Gas guys told them what was going on.
Is this all stuff you knew? Like, you were very comfortable with it?
Yeah, very comfortable with all of it. And this is the bit that gets very interesting. Ken Dixon was one of the founders of the Hong Kong Computer Society. And the other members were Dave McNaughton, who was the computer manager for China Light Power, Anthony O, who was the managing director of IBM, Con Conway, who worked for NCR, another guy who worked for Standard Chartered Bank, one of the guys from the government, and that year Ken Dixon had been the secretary. So he asked me if I would go to one of the meetings standing in for him, but not doing the secretarial work, somebody else was doing that, but just to be there on his behalf and find out what's going on and what Howard Klein, who was the operations manager at Cable and Wireless. So I meet all these people for the first time, and they're all very interested. Where you come from? Oh, from Australia. You're doing Ken's job, yeah. Oh, what are you doing there? And I'm giving them all the stuff. And what's his name? Howard Klein says to me, he said, Bob, he said, I'd be very interested in what you're up to at the moment. He said, any chance of getting together for a coffee in the next couple of days? I said, no problem at all, Howard. And so a couple of days later, he was a guy that would be twice my age. So he had been in his 40s, well into his 40s. So I meet him for a coffee, and he starts off by saying, he said, you don't know very much about me. He said, but I'm the operations manager for the Cable and Wireless Group, and I run all their computer systems for telecommunications. He said, we are a major shareholder in a new startup company called Asia Data, which is a computer bureau. It's jointly owned by the Hong Kong China Bank, Jardines, ICL Hong Kong, Barclays Bank International, and ourselves. And he said, I've been put in there for 6 months, and one of the top things on my to-do list is to find my own replacement, because they need me back at Cable and Wireless. Would you be interested if you're the right guy?
So much for the working holiday.
Didn't get the working holiday. When Ken Dixon, I said, I'm doing Ken's job. He said, I'll be in that job for a while. He said, but I'd like you to come over and meet the ICL people, meet the operations staff, come and meet the general manager, who hasn't joined us yet, but he'll be with us in about 2 weeks' time, coming from the UK. So a couple of weeks later, I met all them. By the time Ken Dixon came back from his leave, I had the next job.
You had a bigger job than the one before.
Yeah.
You got more jam than Hartley's or something.
Total. I worked for them for 7 years, and then I got headhunted to join the telephone company as their computer operations manager when their guy left. And again, that was, that was.
You'd have to keep upgrading your skills though and your knowledge with these things.
But you do it on the job.
Does it happens as a part of the
Well,
process?
it's part of that, and you go to conferences and seminars, and you go to places where, sales and marketeers from various companies and sectors start to give presentations. But you also become part of it as well, because through the university and Polytechnic, they were asking people to come and be presenters, and I was asked to come and be a presenter for the state of computers today, what they're being used for, what are the pitfalls, what are the things to look out for, how do you get involved in world's best practice, what are the sort of things you should be looking for in areas like disaster recovery, business continuity planning.
It just kept
it just grew.
The knowledge came to you rather than you having to go to the
I'd had to read.
Of course.
And it was in my best interest to read and keep
yeah.
up to date with the technology. And the supplying companies, when they wanted to upgrade to a new disk system or an operating system, they had to sell you on the idea that you're getting something that was going to be beneficial,
well,
and not just cost. Absolutely, not just spending more money for the sake of it.
A couple of million to keep you fine.
So there we were, and Kathy got a job as a school teacher, so that was fine.
Right.
She joined the army school as a junior.
Was it GSF around at that
No,
time?
hadn't started yet.
Right.
So she joined the St Andrews, which was the junior school. So they had St George's and St Andrews, which were the army school in Hong Kong, obviously English speaking. And she's a qualified junior teacher and junior school teacher, could also teach English and mathematics at senior level.
Single subjects.
So she did that, and then
well, that sounds like you're sorted then.
Almost.
Right.
The almost bit came about because the Asia Data job, which I stayed in for 7 years, and which I really enjoyed, and I built up the team, and every one of the guys that worked for me in operations went on to do good jobs elsewhere.
That's right.
One of them went to the Hong Kong Bank, one of them went to San Miguel Brewery, one of them joined the government, and after about 10, 15 years, when I knew them, they were all in senior management.
Your guys were running
My
the
guys,
show. Yeah.
and all good mates, really good mates. But the move to the move basically was because I then went back to Hong Kong Polytechnic and finished off my degree.
Right. Why did you do that?
Because I wanted to. I wanted to know.
Did you feel there's the Scottish Presbyterian working class thing?
Maybe.
What
I wanted to do also was to go into much greater depth in areas like law of contract negotiation, legalese. I wanted to find out a lot more because it was going to help me in the job.
Right.
I wanted to know more about marketing issues and not much technical stuff, but these were the main areas.
Yeah.
And along the way, you learn.
So
more
what was
about
that? What did you get out of that?
I just got a BA.
A BA, but in management,
management business. And so that was it, and which meant, of course, that I then had the qualification on paper, which was because
that's the point I'm making. That
yes,
sometimes
because there I had a very responsible job, but I was surrounded by people who were very, very well qualified. There were people there, with PhDs and MBAs and what have you. So Tom Shalhoub was my general manager, and he'd never been a cable and wireless man before, but he came out of NCR to be thrown in the deep end as general manager, and then he became director of Asia Data. And there I am. I'm his right-hand man, computer operations manager. So I just walked into his office one day and I said, Tom, what do I need to do and how long would I need to spend before I get your job? And he said, you can't ever get my job. And by this stage, Cable and Wireless had taken over 70% of the company because they needed to protect themselves from various things. They wanted control, and we were doing a lot more joint ventures. We ran CTM Macau. It was a 50-50 joint venture, so I did all of their billing and stuff. We installed a computer system there. There was one called Shenzhen in China, a joint venture with Cable and Wireless. I built a new computer center in Shatin. So there was a whole bunch of things going on, and Tom basically said, he said, you would have to quit this job, join Cable and Wireless, go through the training, which is what they call the F1 training. Once you've done that, they could probably send you anywhere in the world in any of the other jobs long before you get this one. I said, so what you're telling me is I can never get this job. I said, and by the way that we're going with the competition that's out there, with new computers coming through, a lot of companies getting their own computers, Computer Bureau may be a dying breed and may put themselves out of business one day. I could see it coming. I said, so waiting 10 years and not get your job doesn't seem to me to make a lot of sense. And he said, no, I would agree with you there. So we went out and we had a beer, and I said to him, I've been offered another job. He said, take it. And the telephone company headhunted me. I went out for lunch with a guy called Mike Lawson, who I knew from the football club. And Mike said to me, there was another Scotsman, Alan Davidson, something like that. He had been the department head computer operations for the telephone company, and he was coming up to retirement.
So the telephone company, now it's
Hong Kong
HKT, yeah.
Yeah.
So the
It was
telephone,
and it was
the
HKT.
The bank, the telephone.
It was HKT at that
Yeah.
time, yeah, the big one. So Mike Lawson said to me, he said, we're going to be putting ads out, he said, for his replacement. And there's a couple of guys that we've looked at in the UK, but quite frankly, he said, I wouldn't touch them with a barge pole. He said, what about you? I know you. And so I thought, now at that time, I was probably getting about $13,000 a month.
When was that?
That was 1978.
In the 70s,
In the
40 years ago.
Yes. So I was getting $13,000 a month, and embedded in that was a housing element, okay, because that actually reduced your tax exposure.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, so I sat down with Mike Lawson over a beer in the evening. He said, I'm going to put the job offer on the table for you. He said, but before I do, I want to make sure the parameters are okay. I don't want to embarrass you. I don't want to get it wrong. Right. I don't want you to walk away. Mm-hmm. He said, this job is at department head level. He said, so it's quite a substantive job. He says it's expatriate, so all the perks are in there. And he said, the parameters of the job, he said, the job starts, he said, at $11,800 a month, going up to $14,000 at the moment, but you increment every year automatically as long as and there's a 13th month. And I said to him, I said, well, that's actually not as much as I'm getting at the moment. He said, do you get a housing element? I said, yes, I do. Oh, he said, well, he said, well, we should be able to do a bit better than that then. He said, if I go away and negotiate a starting point of one increment higher than the normal entry level, and we'll give you $8,000 housing allowance on top. So effectively, he gave me a package. He gave me a package of $20,000 a month.
Yeah. Right, off you go from 13.
I got travel, which was at full economy class from Hong Kong to Glasgow, once a year, with 6 weeks leave, free medical, schooling paid for, and my kids were young.
Yeah.
No brainer. So I joined the telephone company.
Funnily enough.
So I started life with them.
I was 78.
78. I worked with the telephone company for 13 years, telephone company group. Along the way, the telephone company, as well as all the utilities, China Light Power, Hong Kong Electric, the government controlled them through. It's to do with making sure that utilities that are given a license to operate in the public domain are limited in how much profits they can make.
Like CLP is
yes.
8%, 12%.
So you're limited through a scheme of control, and the scheme of control basically says you can only get 8% profit margin, and anything above that you must plough it back into development, expansion, development, so, improvements, all that sort of thing. And as the telephone company was going along, suddenly mobile phones came on the market, and the telephone company wanted to set up its own mobile phone division. But if it did so, it would be competing with all the others, and it would leave them at a disadvantage. So we set up CSL, Communication Services Limited.
Right.
So Communication Services Limited it was decided that it would be a good idea to lump a lot of the other services in there that are not under the normal umbrella of just telephony. So computerization, the selling of PABXs, the selling of some computer and telecom solutions were in there, and they moved me from the telephone company. I left the computer operations and everything all behind. I'd already built 3 centres, and I moved into CSL to set up a new division, which was all the non-voice side of the business.
Right. Providing what, consultancy?
Consultancy, integrated voice data, selling products like PABXs that will link into computer systems to provide network environments within the office, computer terminals, and eventually PCs when they became intelligent enough.
So that would, so you went from computer to infrastructure, selling.
To selling.
To selling,
yeah.
right. Okay.
They saw in me a man who could run a company. So I ran a division. I had 5 salespeople. I had one guy that did product marketing. His role was to suss out and bring in new products, or look at new products that could be there for, best practice for our clients. And we built it and built it and built it. And we sold to Cathay Pacific. I put in 6,000 terminals worldwide.
For Cathay?
I became a distributor for Ericsson out of Sweden.
Okay.
I became a distributor for NEC out of Japan. And we just started to build up the business. And then all that goodies with the contract negotiation and stuff started to come good.
Right.
And the marketing shit and, and the stuff that I'd gone to relearn or to pad out.
The dots were starting to join up.
They're starting to join up, and some of what I'd learned was actually not a bad thing to know.
And so if you're running this company, but you're not.
That was a division.
Yeah, but you're not a sales guy.
I'm not a sales guy. I've got salespeople working for me.
So your job was just to make sure everybody got on and knew where they were going, kind of.
And I developed it as a small company, as a division within the bigger company.
Yeah.
So we had our own profit and loss. We had our own budget. I had to do projections as how we're going to make new money going forward, and I ran it.
Right. Yes.
And after a period of time, there was another company which is called Integrated Business Systems, and they had been
IBM.
No, IBS.
IBS.
IBSL, Integrated Business Systems Limited. And it had been set up because they were the agent for a digital product called ROLM, R-O-L-M, which competed directly with the telephone company and CSL's product line. But they brought it in because it was a digital product that was way ahead of its time, and it could provide digital connect to a telephone, and at the same time could act as a server to a whole array within an office or a company environment of terminals. And so they set IBSL up, and it was providing also PABXs from different companies. And so the decision was made to take the entirety of my division, which was all non-voice and nothing to do with mobile phones, and move it all into IBS, with me as the managing director.
So you got yet another.
I became managing director. 38, I was the youngest MD in the Cable and Wireless Group worldwide.
Wow.
Not a huge company, 500 people.
No, but it's very important part of obviously business, and new, and has to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah, and by this stage, I was starting to fly with the gods. I was up there. I became a legal officer of the company because I was.
What age were you? You said
38.
your age, but what years was that then?
So I was 38 at that point when they made me managing director. But I'd moved from the core of the telephone company as computer manager into CSL, and then IBS. And
so that was the 80s.
That was late 80s, yes. And I worked with them right through until 91, 92. And in 91, 92, Cable and Wireless did something very stupid. In the UK, they were setting up Mercury in competition to British Telecom.
They kind of ring a bell, but I don't really.
And now this was silly because Cable and Wireless was a British government-owned company. It went worldwide to every place in the Commonwealth and anywhere else they were invited to set up earth stations to provide international telecommunications to the world, to those that needed it. So they also had bloody big dishes to go via satellite, and they did 65 cable laying ships in the world, putting cable.
Still putting cable down.
Still putting cable on the seabed, connecting places. Huge company. And they were given the opportunity to rival BT. Now, why the hell the British government would suggest that they should go in there, set up Mercury as a rival? They were under political pressure to keeping telecoms costs down, and the only way they could see that happening is through rivalry, competition. So Cable and Wireless, in its infinite wisdom, started to do this, and they realised that they needed money to do it. So they started to asset strip. In Hong Kong, we had 20 houses out overlooking Deepwater Bay. They sold them all. They had the Hong Kong groups within the Hong Kong Telephone Company. I had already merged what came from CSL, from Cable and Wireless Systems to IBS, all into the one company. They decided to get out of computers. At one stage,
property and computers in the 80s. Now that's got to be genius, isn't it? If there are two things that have gone up since then.
Lord Sharp, who came out to Hong Kong in about 1989, and I'd taken over the company, and we all the managing directors had to go to the massive board meeting and present to Lord Sharp who we were, what our company did, how much money we were making, what was our contribution to the parent, and answer any bloody questions that he and his group wanted to throw at you. And they threw some curly ones. And when we finished, we were all going for lunch at the Hong Kong Club. And Mike Gale, who was managing director of Cable and Wireless Hong Kong, and Lord Sharp followed me into the lift. I didn't know they were behind me. And Mike Gale, who was trying, I think at the time, to sort of show off himself a wee bit, turned around to me and said, "You know, Bob, that was a very good presentation, and I'm sure Lord Sharp appreciated more what we actually do." He said, "But I've got to let you know that the Cable and Wireless Group will always derive the majority of its income from voice. It's always going to be at least 70% of the income that's generated by this company." And I said to him, I said, "Within the next 2 years, you will see an explosion through networking of the computer industry that no one's ever saw coming. And if you're not there, you'll be left behind."
And you knew that at the time?
I knew it. I knew it. I could see it from what was happening at the desktop. The intelligence that was coming there to the devices was just amazing.
So they were going to need the
They needed
setup
everything.
to handle it.
They had 65% of the internet traffic for North America, and they sold it. They got rid of all the cable laying ships, and they then started to decimate Hong Kong Telephone Company, and they did it with a view to selling it out to Li Ka-shing's son, which they did. In the process, they closed down my company. They gave me lots of money. Close it down.
They closed it down?
Yeah, they got rid of 7,000 people out of the telephone company and subsidiary group in Hong Kong in 1991. They gave IBM back the right to distribute their own products when we had the agency. They did the same with NEC. They just decided, and they repatriated all the funds back to support Mercury. The company Cable and Wireless doesn't exist anymore.
Whatever happened to Mercury?
Still running, but I don't
think you've even heard of it.
It's still there, but it's not a patch on what it used to be. But here was a bunch of people who actually could not bloody manage out of a wet paper bag. They were good technocrats, but they thought that because they were good engineers and technocrats, they were good at management in the big commercial world, and they bloody well weren't.
And mind you, it's seeing the picture of what's coming, especially when it's never come before. You know, you were in the business, you could see it. They weren't in the business. They think, "No, definitely not."
And I was making good money in the business.
I'm sure.
The contribution out of 500 people, it's always very interesting if you want to compare companies. Just do the profit and loss and divide it by the number of people you've got.
It's like country capita per head.
Yes. I mean, I stood up there and said, you know, the company I run is actually the jewel in the crown. I said, because the company, although it's relatively small, if I look at CSL, the contribution per head of staff is $85,000 per year after tax and everything else is taken into account. From all, there's a couple of thousand people in there, right? So it's a lot of money. I said, my company, it's $480,000 per person, $500,000 per person.
Per year.
And they closed it down.
Yeah.
Cable and Wireless Systems, the little group that I inherited, were making a loss.
So who took over that area then in Hong Kong or in the world?
It went back to the distributing parents of the other big companies.
They'd be delighted to have it, probably.
Of course they would. I took over Cable and Wireless Systems, and when I went through the books, it was an embarrassment because there was loss-making concerns. They were giving away systems at a loss. And I couldn't at first work out why they would do it. Then I realized it was political. They sold a railway signaling system in Taiwan for 25% below cost, right?
Well, you see, with government-owned institutions,
The British government wanted to get the foothold in the door.
It's always the way, isn't it?
But if you're going to put that division under me, how do I cope with that loss?
Well, you don't. Or you cover it.
I went down to Macau and took over all their bloody stuff. They had PABXs in there where they were giving them the maintenance for free. I said,
But,
well,
you know, maybe it's a hangover from colonial old
A wee
boys
bit.
to blah, blah, blah.
there's a wee bit of that.
Is it bad? But so what did you do next then? You were out of a job
Well, there I
with
was
enough
at-
money to buy a yacht. But
No,
what
I was
did
out of the job and I got quite a nice little bonus. Well, I had all my nearly all my provident fund. I already owned a house in Scotland that my parents were living in. My first wife and I, the kids, but by the time we got into 1989, 88, I'd sent my daughter away to boarding school in Victoria
Right.
with a view to her going on to university, and therefore she'd be competing in her last 2 years of school against Australian kids for Australian places, rather than being here competing with the Asian kids for an Australian place. And it was a successful model, and we sent my son as well later. I owned a house in Brisbane. My first wife, unfortunately, became an alcoholic, and Hong Kong was not doing her any good. She didn't like the lifestyle. She said it was not doing her health any good. She didn't want to be here anymore. She felt that she couldn't support me, but she needed to support herself, and she wanted to go off and find herself and get her act together.
Right.
So she left Hong Kong, and she never came back. And she went, and she didn't get her act together. She's been an alcoholic until 2 years ago, and now she's booze-free.
Oh, wow.
And my latest wife and my kids and everybody we've met, and my wife and her have got on great guns, and she's booze-free now.
So that's a
different person.
happy ending.
It's a happy ending.
And how did she come? I'll stop it again and have another break in a minute, but just complete that bit. She was an alcoholic for a long time. Your lady. How come 2 years ago?
Runs in the family.
Oh.
When did she stop? Why did she stop?
How did she get after? I mean, that's a long time to be.
She said that she came to the conclusion that she was suffering from anxiety and depression, and that the only way she could cope with that is to take the alcohol. Mm-hmm. She said that for a long period of time she has not been in control of herself, that she's missed the kids coming around in the evening and spending quality time with her. That they would, they wouldn't bring the kids around in the evening because she'd be pissed.
Right.
And so she made the decision that she had to take control, and it was time.
Well,
and she did.
You wonder why did that never come up before?
Why didn't that before? When we moved, I moved house out to Sha Tin many years ago when I was building a computer centre for the telephone company, and the family all moved out there. And by this stage, she was a house mum, looking, getting the kids organised. My career had taken off. I was earning good money. She didn't need to go out and work. Everything was, and we had neighbours out there. When I moved into 18 houses and a compound, a swimming pool, and tennis court, and every house had a garden. There's some similarities to this actually, although actually it was a bit bigger. But there was other ladies there, and they would get together for a coffee afternoon, and then it would develop into wine. And by the time I came home at night, she'd drunk 2 bottles and not in control. And I needed a wife sometimes for dinners and things, as you do. Anyway, that's an aside. It's very, very sad. She's a bloody good lady. She's very intelligent. She was a good mother. She still is, and she's got her act back together. And
that's great.
And I've met her, and it's great to see her.
And you yoga on.
Yes.
On that note, we'll leave that one. But that's good. Thank you, Bob.